Magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI for short, is an imaging tool that generates detailed anatomical images of the human body. MRI has many benefits, including that there is no ionizing radiation, which is the kind of radiation that can be harmful to your body, and it's also non-invasive, which means that you don't need to stick anything into someone's body in order to get these images. Now I'm going to give a brief overview of how MRI works. We start off with a person with water molecules inside. Each person has approximately 60% water, and each of these water molecules is comprised of an oxygen and two hydrogens. MRI works with the hydrogens. Each of these hydrogens is essentially a proton. It has a positive proton and an electron orbiting around it. And a special property of protons, and really subatomic particles in general, is that they have a property called spin, which basically means that it behaves like a little tiny bar magnet with a north and south pole. What happens when you take these spins, these little tiny magnets, and you place them in an external magnetic field? So you imagine a big magnet forming a big field, and then you place these little tiny magnets inside this larger field. What happens is that these spins, these tiny spins, are going to align with the main magnetic field direction, which is where you see the yellow arrows pointing. B0 refers to the magnetic field strength of that external magnetic field. Something else that happens when these spins align with the main magnetic field direction is that they actually start to spin around the axis of that main external magnetic field. The frequency at which they spin around the axis of that field is called the Lamar frequency. And it's actually proportional to B0, which is the main magnetic field strength. So what that basically means is that if you have a stronger magnetic field, these spins are going to precess or wobble or spin around that main magnetic field axis faster than if they were in a smaller external magnetic field. The problem is that when these spins are aligned with that main magnetic field in that direction of the yellow arrows, it's actually very difficult to detect any signal that's coming from these tiny spins because they're kind of overshadowed by the external magnetic field. So what we need to do is excite these spins in order to get them to tip away from that main magnetic field direction. In order to excite the spins to do that and move away so that we can collect their signal, we send a radio frequency pulse at the Lamar frequency. So we're exciting them with energy at the specific frequency at which they are already spinning. And this is the most effective way to get the spins to change direction from the direction of the yellow arrows in the longitudinal direction and get them to tip into the horizontal plane or the transverse plane. The question is though, once you have all of these different signals, how do you know where the signal is coming from? All the signals are coming with that same frequency, so it's difficult to distinguish where they're actually coming from. So this is where we introduce the concept of a gradient, which means that we're basically going to cause each of these signals to have a slightly different frequency from the spins around it based on the position. So for example, if you're a signal from a proton coming in one position, you might have a slightly higher or slightly lower magnetic field than the spin in another position because of this gradient that we create. At this point, you have the different signals with slightly different frequencies that are coming, and the RF coil, which is basically just a piece of equipment, detects the sum of all of these different signals. All these different signals with their different frequencies are then mapped into an image, which is really a frequency image. The problem is we don't really know how to read a frequency image. We're used to reading a regular image that is in space. So what we do then is that we use a mathematical transformation called a Fourier transform. And without really getting into the details of what a Fourier transform is, what it basically does is that it allows you to decode the spatial position so that you can then obtain the spatial image that we are used to seeing. So as an example, this is an image of the human brain. So this is how you go from a person with water molecules to hydrogens from those water molecules to protons having a property called spin, to spins aligning with the magnetic field, to their particular frequency precessions around that main magnetic field, to sending an RF pulse in order to excite the spins to tip away from the magnetic field, and then applying a gradient in order to differentiate where the signals are coming from, then detecting the sum of all of those signals, mapping them into a frequency image, and then decoding that image into an image that we can recognize. And that is how MRI works.